Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Council of Fans podcast. And I believe for everyone watching, for all the viewers, it has only been a week since we have uploaded the last one with John D. Roddy, which was a really interesting podcast and discussion. But for us here, it has been about 3.5 months, so a lot has happened. But during that time, I still have all my lovely guests and now co-hosts. So, first of all, let's start off with my left-hand man. We have Ken.
Hi.
We have Gallifreyan, aka Talking Tube.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Well done for remembering your cue. Welcome to Penguin as well.
Hey, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. And last but not least, we have Nikki.
My Govan and Melanin.
So it's wonderful to be back after so long, and near the end of the podcast, we'll talk about what's been the difference and like how different has it been, like in the talking community around the Amazon show in general. Around this like 3.5 months has been since we did the last podcast, we recorded it, but at the same time we're going to be discussing really continuity with the film trilogies, as this is quite an interesting discussion, and there's so many different ways that we could approach the discussion. And the main things that we want to know is what Amazon they would most likely they will do, which we'll get into near the end. What we think they should do, because of course our opinions are better than the marketers. And finally, we have what we think Amazon is going to do from evidence that we have. But everyone here, is that fine? Should we get right into it?
Let's do it.
Let's go.
So I'm thinking that this is you can put this into marketing a bit with continuity. So I think there's no one better to start off with than Penguin. So firstly, just I know from if you guys can tell from the viewers that you might start to know people's opinions right now around this, and you might know Penguins, but take it away.
All right. So what we're looking at right now is, we're living in a day and age of franchises. I mean, look at what Disney is doing to Star Wars. Look at what they're doing with Marvel. Everyone right now is trying to think of, okay, what franchises can I get a hold of, and how can I expand that, and how can I milk those for as much revenue as I can get. I mean, they still generally want to make an entertaining product, but let's not forget that all of these are first commercial endeavors, and the next, the artistic value. And that's not to say that you can't have both of those in one film, but that's the priority here. These are all money making. These are all productions that are geared around making money. So to me, it all comes down to what makes the most sense for Amazon. Do they want to overtly, deliberately tie themselves to the movies that were made, the two trilogies that were made 20 and 10 years ago? Or do they want to and potentially limit what they can do in the Third Age by just crossing off the two best known of Tolkien's works? Or do they want to leave that open? And that's really what this question comes down to. It's not what we want as the audience. It's, does Amazon think that they can make more money by connecting to those films, or pretending like they don't exist? That's the question that needs to be answered, not anything regarding artistic value. It's entirely a commercial question.
Yeah, and I know you've mentioned a lot about it being more of just around the business. How will these maybe even the executives, how the salespeople, what would generate the most things, and maybe partnering it with the film trilogies would be a thing. But Ken, but let's say that's not an issue. All that business stuff is aside that Penguin has rightly put forward. Just say you are in charge and you get to decide what they would do, and having these all these business things not attached. Which way would you go with it? Would you still go with the film trilogies and in continuity that, or would you take it own separate way?
I think I would. I'm fond of the aesthetic that has been established by the movies. And I think even commercially, it makes sense to tie yourself into something that people know and like so much. Um, so it's artistically it's valid. I can see the validity of a new interpretation as well. I like Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, and that's a completely different aesthetic. Um, but at the same time, I think there is a logic, commercial and certainly artistic, furthering the same aesthetic in the same way that indeed all the major franchises are doing. No one is overhauling look of Star Wars, or as much as you can say that it has a look the MCU or of the Wizarding World, those being the four main big franchises, and I suppose James Bond. Um, so yeah, it's a complex topic once you start talking about the economics of it, as well as artistically. But I think there is a point to continuity.
Yeah, I agree. Um, to be honest, like the aesthetic that was set in the Lord of the Rings, is the reason why I originally fell in love with the whole story. And I think that it would be a good idea for them to continue with that, just because it will tie things together and it will, like, I mean, sure, there were some negative opinions about it too back in the day, but mostly people were pleased and happy with what they made, at least with The Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is a different story, but if they go back to that, I think it would be the safest bet. But of course, as we're talking, this happens thousands of years before the events that we've already seen. They have some room to have the continuity, but still, like, invent new stuff and make it different. So the smartest things they will do is to use elements that will make it recognizable, but still reinvent themselves back in the past, sort of. And I think definitely, like, that would make me very happy for sure to see that. It's like, horror movies leaving Easter eggs of other horror movies that are iconic to them, sort of. So it's kind of like having Easter eggs backwards in
Mm-hmm.
time, which is cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good.
Well, that was interesting. But Gallifreyan, what are your opinions on it?
Well, I think we absolutely should have continuity with Rings in the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings on for a few reasons, like all the set designs and the characters. If you look at Elrond and all the other elves and just general designs like that, like with Moria also, Rivendell, all of that stuff really, really looks good. And, we may as well have that sort of continuity with Lord of the Rings on Prime. Because if we see Moria and the Lord of the Rings on Prime, which we definitely, but it looks totally different. It looks more like a Hobbit than a Dwarven Mansion, and again, that's a drastic example, I think, but still, if it looks more like a Hobbit, Peter Jackson's more, then people are going to think it looks a little bit off. And there's really just no reason to not have continuity, except for, maybe you want someone else's adaptation of Lord of the Rings or someone else's nonetheless. That doesn't really give a good reason as to why you shouldn't see a similarity with Peter Jackson's adaptations.
Yeah.
So I guess it's me against three, huh?
No, it's I'm on your side as well.
Yep.
So okay, it's two of us versus three, but you're the host, so you don't really count.
Yeah, I don't recap, but
Uh,
mine is the same as yours. But go take it away.
All right, so no one really discussed in depth the commercial attributes, and yeah, there's reasons for, there's reasons against. A pro being, of course, well, it's familiar to the audience. The audience won't be surprised and shocked at how different things are, but let's be honest. How many freaking reboots of Spider-Man have we seen in the past 20 years? How many versions of Batman? I think we're on our third Batman in a decade, because we've had Christian Bale, we've had Ben Affleck, and now we're getting Team Edward as our sparkly vampire, or as our sparkly Batman. Can't remember the name of the actor right now. So I think people are very comfortable and accepting of different takes. I mean, how many Sherlock Holmes have we seen? How many versions of Bond? I mean, think about all the franchise iterations. So I don't think that's a real, should be a real worry to anyone. Now, speaking of artistically, it's just doing the same thing that Jackson did with a completely different artistic team. I mean, that just feels cheap and lazy to me. And, imagine someone comes to you and says, hey, do you want to work on, goes to a designer, says, hey, do you want to go work on Lord of the Rings? Great. Okay. Yeah, I have all these ideas. I've loved the books. Okay, well, that's great. But just do exactly what these guys did. I mean, they're adapting. Amazon, for whatever reason, chose to do the Second Age, which is a very unrealized, unfulfilled setting in the world that Tolkien created. And you're saying, let's couple that ambition with an extreme conservatism by just doing, by and large, just iterating on the exact same thing that we've seen already. That just would be really disappointing to me. And frankly, I don't want, I'm honestly bored with the tropes that Jackson borrowed from that have since grown everywhere. That's orcs and the evil guys as just possessing spiky, jagged armor, elves only using curves and very organic forms, and dwarves as Scottish stereotypes who never progressed beyond geometry class. I'm kind of bored with that. Whoever, and the example that Galathane gave of Moria, I mean, all we saw of Moria was by and large caverns that were largely just rough and a hall full of pillars, and that's it. I mean, they've got a lot of room for interpretation, a lot of room to expand. And let's not forget that the Moria we saw in the movies actually was not the Moria that Tolkien described. You can flip into their Journey in the Dark and Fellowship, and you'll see that the pillars in Moria were described as being carved as trees, not harsh geometry. So, I think there is a whole lot of room to explore and do something new. It frankly just takes balls to do it. And I'd be disappointed if Amazon, after spending $1 billion to bring to life something that's so vague, so unfilled out, to basically play it safe here.
I think there's some truth to that. I mean, it kind of does take balls, because if you, I don't know, gamble with like nipples on the outside of a Batman suit, it's a gamble, and in that situation, it's a pretty bad gamble. But I
in
get
the big scheme of things, that was the least of Joe Schulmaker's problems. Of course, cartoon characters, narratives that don't make any sense. So those are easy things to point at, but if the rest of the movie made sense, people wouldn't be as bothered by them.
Yeah, but in this situation, I'm talking mostly about set designs and character design, stuff like that. I don't see why our elves should look totally different, and like why their garbs, and like why should Moria look totally different, or Rivendell and places like that. And maybe they're not completely faithful to what Tolkien wrote. They're definitely not, but still, they look pretty good, and I think it's mostly confusing, especially for newer people who've never read the books, and they've just watched The Lord of the Rings, and then they go watch the show, and then
everything's totally different. It's just
Well,
makes it a lot more confusing, and I don't think that confusion is worth it.
so what you're saying is that Christopher Nolan, when he was doing Batman Begins, he should have, said, you know what, I should make this stylistically in line with what Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher did for his movies, because I don't want to confuse the audience. Or Kevin Feige, when they began doing the MCU, they should have said, let's try to bring back Tobey Maguire and put him into the Iron Man movie, because that would be confusing to the audience if this thing is too different than what people have seen before.
That's a little
But
bit different, though, because that's like a remake of the same character, pretty much. Whereas in this, it's still, at least we think that it's going to be set in the same universe, and it's not going to be conflicting. It's not like a remake of the Lord of the Rings or anything like that.
And it's a bigger
it doesn't have to be
franchise.
exactly the same, and they don't need to bend too much just to make it look exactly like Peter Jackson's. But I'm saying, to use your example of Batman again, why have a pink Batman when the black Batman worked just fine? And again, that's
it's
a
not
really
just
drastic
Pink
example.
Panther.
it's not just the color; it's the entire design of the suit. You've got a suit, and that looks one way, and then you've got Batman Begins and the rest of that franchise where everything looks like military body armor.
So
But again, there is some similarity with that. With granted, I actually haven't watched that older Batman, but I know there's the nipple thing. But still, I think particularly with places that we're going to see in the Lord of the Rings on Prime, that we also saw in the Lord of the Rings, I think it just makes more sense, to be honest.
So I think the main thing we could take away from this is, does Amazon? I think for Amazon personally, that it's either all or nothing. I know the ironic thing there is that Amazon have a show called All or Nothing, but aside from that, is that do Amazon? I'm not sure the case that maybe you can go 50-50, as the second age is so far away from the events of the Lord of the Rings. Having some continuity could work, but I think Amazon either have to publicly do it or not do it at all. What do you think on that, Nikki? Do you think Amazon has like a big decision to make and they can't just go 50-50?
No, actually. Kind of like I said before, with the Easter eggs.
Wait, can
I
you say
mean,
yes or no? Your first bit cut out.
well, no. I would say no.
Yeah, go on, continue.
Because because like they can use nods, so it doesn't have to be all of it. And because it is back in time, they can use some of it. They don't have to use all of it. They might, like, if they're gonna do it, because I mean, a horror film doesn't go out publicly and say we left this, this, and this Easter egg, we left this nod here, and this is inspired by this. They leave that up to the fans and the people watching. So I kind of feel like they have a little bit of freedom here because it's so many years before as well. They have that freedom to sort of play around with it a little bit. Just don't go crazy and make the elves pink, or just try and
Yeah.
keep it within the aesthetic of that is actually Tolkien, based on the books and based on the imagery and the drawings and the paintings and what has been created. And I mean, uh, they're
But doesn't
they're
that
gonna have to go
seem?
very extreme to go wrong, I
But
guess.
doesn't that seem? I think the point here is that doesn't that seem a bit lackluster then? Not lackluster, but in the sense that it's interesting that they still want to keep it with the Jackson film trilogies, but it maybe have something new, something fresh, have all these new ideas, maybe go this different route. I know it's so maybe because it is so far apart, the events of the Second Age and the Lord of the Rings. Just why not just go for something new and like. Pengam, hopefully, I think you share the similar views, or you could probably explain it better than I can.
Yeah, so I guess ultimately what I expect Amazon to do is to keep a foot in both worlds, be similar enough that it's not off-putting, but at the same time leave themselves the freedom, because mean, why would Amazon deliberately limit themselves to a, to cut themselves, limit themselves from, doing their own version of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit down the line? uh that from a commercial and franchise perspective does not make any sense to me. From the money that they could make by becoming the source for Middle Earth, having its own Middle Earth cinematic universe, I think that sounds a whole lot more lucrative and better to me if I was the one doing this than committing to sharing it with New Line Cinema. I mean, again, we know the rights situation. They're working directly with the estate, and the estate holds the television rights to all of this material. The estate, Tolkien only sold off the movie rights to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which so New Line and the current rights holders can do whatever they want with, as long as that material is sourced from The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, which is why we're getting that War of the Rohirrim movie, when you would think that a anime production would work better as a television special or a brief TV miniseries. So to me, it makes far more sense to do the bold and brave thing in the eyes of most of the listeners, to go out on their own. I'm sorry, I just realized I did not answer the question, but I don't remember what the question is. It's been that kind of day.
Yeah, and I think
So-
they hit most beats anyways, but go on, talk to you.
So I just dropped a couple images of Minas Tirith in the chat, and I think Minas Tirith is a really good example of what we might sort of see in the Lord of the Rings on Prime. And of course, we're not going to see Minas Tirith itself, but I think similar architecture in Numenor would be a really good idea. And in this case, Minas Tirith, it's like a fallen city. If you just look at the image, Fellowship, you'll probably have to put it in on the podcast.
It'll be on screen.
Yeah. It looks kind of dirty, honestly. It looks a little bit decrepit. It looks like it was once really great, white and bright and awesome and really glorious, sort of like a little
It looks like that because
kind of
it's
a little bit
mostly
like Valinor, like 1% Valinor or something like that. It looks really mighty. And I think what they might do with that, and what they probably will do with that, is sort of take Minas Tirith, take that style of architecture, ramp it up to 100, make it look a lot better, and then that's going to be the final product of what we see in Numenor. Because it also makes sense with the story, too.
I mean, like the architecture, yeah, I can see that working. Kind of have a kind of Mediterranean style architecture for Numenor, and I think Hen has even suggested going so far as being Middle Eastern, right?
I think, it's kind of because of some of the people that Amazon had cast to be Numenorians. I think it makes sense for them to play it up like I once said it would look like Middle Earth's version of Dawn. Just so that it kind of works visually. But Minas Tirith in the Jackson movie does look Mediterranean. It has a look kind of like Moorish Spain in some ways. So it could work. I completely agree that the aesthetic of Amazon's Numenor should at least vaguely resemble that of Gondor as Jackson depicted it, really mostly in Minas Tirith. And I would love to see the same armor as well. I think that armor is really cool, especially the royal armor of the king, in this case the queen, but still, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, sure.
I think you bring up a really good point with the armor there. I was looking really closely at some of the armor of like Elendil and Isildur, and unless I'm mistaken, they've actually got like fish plate, stuff like that, fish designs on their armor, on their helmet, and I never really, and that's even visible when you see the crowning of Aragorn or Elessar in the Return of the King, and that's really cool because that does tie into their Numenorian roots.
It is. It does. A lot of the design work is quite cool, to quote Gandalf. And also the elves, I love the linden armor. I would love for that to look the same, especially because we do see it quite a lot in the movies, because we see it in the prologue to the Fellowship of the Ring, but then we see Elrond wearing it in 2 more movies. He wears it in An Unexpected Journey and in the Battle of the Five Armies, so that would be cool to see.
Wait, I like this. So, Penguin, would you like to see continuity in the costume and weapons of the dwarves?
Hell no. First of all, I thought the dwarves and the limit to only using geometry was dumb, and I think it was frankly lazy. I mean, yeah, sure, great job executing it by the crew and the designers that drew everything out, the people that made it all, but conceptually very lazy. That's how I feel about the elves as well, only being curves. The orcs, for the most part, and one exception being kind of like the Urukai, in that they, had this. I think it actually made sense. You've got this rush, mass-produced army that looks cool, looks great, but doesn't really function all that well when it's put to the test. So no, I mean, frankly, for the most of the Manish races, for the human, the more mundane stuff in Jackson's Lord of the Rings, I like. I'm not a big fan of anything else really conceptually.
Yeah.
Then you get down to the bad guys and how they just, there's a line in Fellowship where they're trying to decide whether or not they can trust Aragorn or Strider to them at that time, and they say, you know what? I think I can like you. I've always thought that a servant of the enemy would look fair but feel foul, but you. And then Strider laughed and said, "Oh, you're saying I look foul but feel fair." So yeah, I want to see Sauron and have his forces not be kind of horrendous, but not just like obviously over the top evil. Like I want to look at orcs, and instead of feeling terrified, be kind of filled with loathing, and thinking, oh, this is something that's terribly warped and doesn't really have a real control over its fate, to be a monster and a foot soldier of the enemy.
Yeah, and
I mean, and I even go so far as to say that imagine I want the men of the East and the South who are swayed into, serving Sauron to actually, look at him and not think, you know what? Something about this guy looks evil to me. Why are we the baddies here? I, want them to actually think, okay, yeah, serving Sauron makes sense.
Yeah, there's so many dynamic ways that how important all these costumes and having everything looks as well would affect the plot of the story. And I think from this, I think we've gotten to the end of that part where I think hopefully you've seen the two different sides and just arguments for each, whether you want continuity or not in the show. And I think we've talked more about aesthetic and design, costumes, and weapons. So I know we did a podcast about 5-6 months ago with Voice of Geekdom on music, and I think we briefly mentioned continuity there, but I thought it'd make sense to bring up again. Maybe some people did not watch all that or watch that part. But Nikki, the big question is Howard Shore, yes or no?
That's a difficult one to answer because I love the original soundtrack, but um like with a new composer, I think maybe they should do their own thing. Uh so I kind of want to say I'm kind of neutral to this because regardless, I'll be excited. I just hope it's epic.
Could you see an opportunity where they do get a new composer, but then have maybe because they might want to use someone I don't know who Howard Hall is, but use Howard
Cool.
Shore's. That sounds like someone you sound nothing. That's an inappropriate joke. It's Howard Shore seems like maybe have a new composer on, and then have maybe Howard Shore come in just to maybe supervise or just maybe just give his expertise, but not be have that central role that he did have in the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit productions. As remember, he was literally at the orchestras doing everything, fully involved, dedicated a lot of time, and I don't think that can really be replicated now. But Nikki, do you think you could see that where
Yeah,
just have that
I
dynamic?
mean, they do that in like the Harry Potter series, where they have that, and then they have different composers, and
Transfusion
also
Howard.
going into Fantastical Beasts and Where to Find Them, which is like
Transfusion Howard.
similar thing but different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go on ahead. It seems like you want to get involved.
I was saying it was James Newton Howard on Fantastic Beasts, composer. But yeah, they're using the same themes. Different composers using the same themes.
Yeah.
You can do
Exactly.
that.
Well, but you
And
guys are also comparing a studio, the same studio that made the first set of movies, to a situation which the same studio which made the same set of movies is the same studio that's making another set of movies. I mean, here we're talking about a different studio altogether, completely different production teams trying to deliberately ape what came before it. I mean, I guess it's a little disappointing because, I mean, I'm interested in creativity. I want to see a fresh take on Middle Earth and the freedom that would allow the storytellers and designers. I want these people to be able to go back to the source without any baggage, good or bad, from Jackson weighing them down. I mean, all in all, I would rather Amazon be bold and fresh and even fail than rather than draw from the same stale well that has dominated Middle Earth and pop culture over the past 20 years. You know, we have multiple iterations and takes on all sorts of characters. You know, you've got your various comic book adaptations, you've got Bond, you got Bond, you've got Dickens, you've got various Sherlock Holmes out there. But no, imagine if when that, you know, I really enjoyed those BBC productions of Bond, no, not Bond, of Sherlock Holmes with Benedict Cumberbatch and
Martin Freeman.
you know, young Bilbo Baggins, yeah, and Martin Freeman, and but imagine if they said, you know, no, that original movie from I don't know, the 1950s is such a classic. Let's try to play around with that. No, I mean, what we got was so different and enjoyable. Hey, I even enjoyed the versions that had those recent movies with the guy who played Iron Man. You know, it was different. You know, I guess the purist might think a little strange to see Sherlock Holmes doing bare knuckle boxing in dark alleys, but it made for an enjoy. You know, I enjoyed them for what they were, and then moved on with my life. That's ultimately what I want to see. Frankly, I'm not interested in massive interconnected universes. I'd have no problem whatsoever if we got a bunch of Middle Earth media in the future that was as stylistically different from one another as The Hobbit is from Lord of the Rings is from The Silmarillion. I mean, you've got a lighthearted children's fairy tale against heroic epic romance, and then you've got Tolkien giving us mythology, not to mention all of those other incomplete works and other versions of the Legendarium. I mean, let's get, I'd love to see some diversity and boldness and fresh takes here. But I guess I'm probably alone in the room here. Well, except from you, Fellowship, but you never really publicly take a stance, so you don't count.
Indeed, and that's after recently probably a good
Good
thing that I'm
point.
going to keep. But we're going, Nikki.
Well, I see your point. I do, and I do agree. Like, I think it's exciting that they're like taking a risk and going, like if they do their own thing, I think that will be cool to see. Just like don't go out of their way to try and be so different from the movies that already exist that they completely abandon everything that is Tolkien to us just to be different.
Oh sure, I agree. If they do something similar, I think it should be they should have ended up there from a case of parallel evolution rather than trying to do the same thing. But I wouldn't really want them to say let's be completely different for the sake of being completely different, because there are things that I personally like, even as there are things that I personally dislike, and there's some things I'm ambivalent about.
Yeah, and I think we have given, well, not me, but we've given our opinions on what Amazon will do. But now, I think Ken, I'll start this off with you. What, as of right now, do you think Amazon is doing, regardless of what we have said and thought and have our opinions on so far?
I think most evidence definitely point towards them looking for some continuity. The show is being produced in some sort of cooperation with New Line.
Yeah, I got that on the
You
screen. Yeah.
also, yeah, you also have New Line doing their own thing in the same universe at the same time. This anime film. But more importantly, it's been said by a number of the members of the production. First of all, shortly before I'll just turn out the information, but very, very shortly after Amazon concluded their um, negotiations for the rights, they had a conversation with Peter Jackson. March 2018. No, not very long into development that would be. Which they wouldn't need to do if it was a completely new realization of Middle Earth. They wouldn't even need to do that conversation. Peter Jackson never had a conversation with Ralph Bakshi. Ralph Bakshi
Well,
kind of begrudged that, but still. So they
well, if
wouldn't.
he begrudged that, don't you think it would be kind of like just the norm in the industry to say, "Oh, you did this before. What did you think of this, et cetera, et cetera?" So just just a thought. I mean,
It is.
is it a
True.
common courtesy in the industry to when you're exploring something again to go to someone who last went there? I mean,
It is. It is.
I'm not a filmmaker, so I can't speak to that. So, but if it is
Actually,
common, that
I'm not sure
if it is
filmmakers
rather
really do it.
if it is rather common, then you kind of have to ask, or someone that once did a historic. If you're doing historical epic in the style of Gladiator, wouldn't you go to Ridley Scott and say, "Hey, this is what we're working on. What do you think of it?"
I'm not sure. I can't think of many examples of that sort of thing happening in movie history. Um, I don't think Nolan, for instance, took the advice of Tim Burton about how to do Batman or Joel Schumacher. And that sort of thing isn't really prevalent in filmmaking in any real way, with the exception of maybe filmmakers remaking their own movies, which was popular in the transition from silent to sound.
Yeah, but
But other but
back to Amazon now,
and
because
yeah,
we
yeah,
can
and
talk. Unless you want to finish off what you're saying.
sure, and just as I said, and he had been after those discussions, which had been, they weren't particularly sure. They took a while. He said, quote, that Amazon will try to have a series and a world where it sort of fits with the films. They want to keep the designs. And in another quote, he said specifically, it's in the same world. And John Howe, who has worked on both projects, again, no reason really to get John Howe otherwise, said the same twice. He said it's a continuation, it's faithful to the existing trilogies. Orlando Bloom, who is, kind of looked up on it, seems to have arrived in the same conclusion. He said, it's not a remake. It's everybody that has any sort of connection to this in any way, except Amazon themselves, which I think it serves their purposes to keep it vague for now. But everybody else had been completely explicit that
But
it is a
yeah,
continuation.
another thing I like to add on to that, even when me and you looked at those contracts that were quite
Oh
detailed
yeah,
and talked more about New Zealand tourism, that some did point out the fact that Amazon continually wanted to, not Amazon, New Zealand wanted to continually show that they are the home for Middle Earth. They
indeed.
want to stay the number one place, and in doing that,
But
yeah, but with doing that, there would the correlation between the Jackson film trees would have to be there no matter what, because they want Middle Earth back again, and you can't then if they say if the Amazon show is in a different universe or whatever to the Lord of the Rings, then you have New Zealand saying, "Welcome back to Middle Earth," or "This is the home of Middle Earth." I think for even New Zealand standpoint, it'd be much more beneficial. Just say yes, we're home to Middle Earth. The Lord of the Rings film trilogies were filmed here. Now the Amazon show is being filmed here.
Okay, that's honestly the Hin's points, quoting, referring to Jackson and Orlando Bloom, are stronger than that, because New Zealand, they're interested in tourism. I mean, just think about how, early on in development, the news broke that Amazon was strongly considering Scotland, and the name of the studio escapes me at the moment, but they, everyone was like, oh, wow, they're doing Scotland. And then was announced that New Zealand got them, that New Zealand managed to reel them back in. And I would call the continuity people all gave a massive sigh of relief. But then you look at kind of how many breaks and special considerations Amazon got from the deal. I mean, saying that in New Zealand threw themselves at Amazon is kind of a bit of an understatement. I mean, that's how desperate they were for that tourism, that boost to their tourism industry, to say that we are the home of New Zealand, or excuse me, home of Middle Earth. So from New Zealand's perspective, I don't think they care one bit about continuity between the movies, between various franchises, so long as worldwide they are known as the only place as the home of Middle Earth on planet Earth.
I'm talking to you. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, returning to the original topic, I'm not that digressed a little bit, but I think that there definitely will be continuity, and that's because of the logic, or at least my logic. I think it makes more sense. But then also, there's the Weta involvement.
They're really not involved.
Very minimal.
Very
right?
minimal, and that's basically, and the fact that there
And
could be
then
that there's potential
there's
legal
little other stuff.
ramifications. Yeah.
And we've got stuff like the font on the chair of the directors. That's really small. I don't think that means too much, but
I have
Fellowship,
a book that's
you'll put something up on the screen, I guess. But I think they will, because it worked, and they want to reach back into the Lord of the Rings audience, and they want to get all those people who are probably like, I don't know, in their 40s now, 30s, and they saw the Lord of the Rings when it first came out, and so they're going to be really excited about it.
Really
but if
reasonable people.
if they start watching the Lord of the Rings on Prime and then they don't realize that it's the Lord of the Rings on Prime, the Lord of the Rings, they don't realize it's in that universe, they're going to be like, what the heck? What is this? And they're going to be a little bit confused, and they're just going to want a little bit of a blast from the past. So I think that they definitely will have continuity. There's a couple of other small things that suggest it, but generally, I definitely do think that Amazon is going to aim for some amount of continuity. And again, it's not all going to be a one-to-one. Like, they're not going to cast actors from the Lord of the Rings to be Elrond, or I don't know, Thranduil, or whatever.
Oh, you've
About the actors that they had
forgotten
cast
the
was
actors.
insane.
Yeah. Oh, Nikki, do you want to go more about this?
And
About
and with music, I also want to add that although Howard Shore has not yet been contacted by Amazon to make more music, it's still a possibility that he can, because I looked it up, and I'm pretty sure music composing is done in post-production, and of course they're not quite onto that stage yet. And when we last heard that he was not on the show, that was quite a few months ago. So he could be, even right now, planning on working on the show. We don't know, and it's still a possibility.
Yeah, but Gallifin, you raised a really, really good point that probably me and Ken are kicking ourselves right now. And I think because Nikki is an actor, yep. What about Arameo and Morford Clark? Talk to us about that.
Well, they look
Nikki?
pretty similar.
What? Wait, sorry, what? I kind of lost half your sentence, so I'm not sure what you're asking.
It was Morford Clark and Robert Arameo, the similarities between the Lord of the Rings film trilogies, and of course as an actor yourself. Like, does that give more to the argument that there will be continuity?
Maybe. I mean, she does look quite alike, so there is like
They're
trying.
both they're both pretty and blonde, and that kind of matches the description of Galadriel. So I feel like we
Oh,
get too
there's more
curious.
than that. There's more than that because her facial features are quite similar to hers. Like they're quite similar in the way that like their eyes and there's a lot there that is
Yeah.
more similar than if they were just going for a blonde.
But for me,
Arameo
yeah,
I
and all the
would
other people.
generally disagree with that. I think Morphed Clark looks pretty different from Kate Blanchett. Like, she's got freckles, and I know, of course, there's no way she's actually going to have freckles. They're going to cover that up. But I just don't think she looks that similar. With Robert Arameo, though, he does look very similar to Hugo Weaving, for sure.
but
And other people that have auditioned for that role. What's his name?
Bob Porter, that's the one you got cast.
Bill Porter and another guy before that, Connor Fogarty, all look like Hugo Weaving doppelgangers.
Yeah,
It's
that's
almost
the
uncanny.
I think the one better than Morphe Clark's one because I do get the point with blonde and
And also another case, we don't have it confirmed, but god damn it, look at Peter Mullen and especially listen to him. That's a Peter Jackson dwarf. That's a Scottish Peter Jackson dwarf right there.
Oh God, I hate
Literally
those.
Scottish,
I hate
know?
those dwarves. They should all be eradicated.
Not the book dwarves, just Peter Jackson's. And I'll admit, I absolutely hate Peter Jackson's dwarves. I like the style, but like the personality of the dwarves, I think that can go in the bin, and just everything else about them.
They
aside from,
just
like, the style.
they're just here. Let's
They have
Hen
no
and I had a
personality.
discussion. We had
They're just
they had
drunk.
they had a personality, but it was the wrong personality. I mean, Hen and I had a discussion some time ago when we were comparing. Hen was comparing the dwarf Gimli, and which is the trope that Jackson ran with for the dwarves later on, to that Irish guy from
Steven.
Braveheart. Yeah,
I have an article on that.
and they were both kind of said that they were had comedic effect, and to me the difference was sure they both had comedic effect, but in the case of Stephen, he also had a threat and a menace, and there was an intimidation factor there because they showed that he was a credible threat and capable of great violence. Whereas Gimli, he was just comic relief and comic relief and comic relief, so that
sure, but that's
it came across to me like a barking chihuahua. And if you're a chihuahua is a very small dog that you can hold. Yeah, and that thinks it's all that, and it's not. All you have to do is drop kick that thing, and it would sail. It would sail a couple 100 meters. It's
100 meters. If you think a chihuahua.
Well, we have an international audience, so I was trying to use more common terms. But regardless, that's that was Gimli, and then they went with that trope in The Hobbit, and the dwarves never felt threatening. They just felt like, hey, it almost felt. I mean, if they were based off a real, they're a Scottish stereotype. That's it. All bluster, no bite. Hope I'm not offending any Scots here, but I'm just saying it's the stereotype.
Yeah,
sure. We had some dwarves that were done with more dignity. Balin, who Peter Mullen auditioned for. Dwalin, Orin, more than a couple. Thrain. So we've had a mix of good.
Well, Thorn wasn't exactly the fool that like all the other dwarves in general were, but his character was still very similar. He was just really prideful and kind of a jerk.
Yeah, honestly, I'd say let's take let's go back to, this is one of the issues I have with continuity, is that you have to play within these lines rather than inventing your own. I'd say if I was doing the dwarves, I'd say, okay, Tolkien deliberately mimicked these off he used Jewish stereotypes, only he kind of played on them a bit, but he also looked and said, hey, these are people that are more often than not foreigners and strangers and living in alien lands for generation after generation, but keeping their own language and their own cultural traditions and so forth. I'm like, that'd be interesting. Let's take, I don't know, look at the Bible, look at the book of, book of First and Second Kings and so First and Second Chronicles, and use that kind of culture as the starting point for the Jews or for the dwarves, with a layer of they have an instinctive gift and inclination to be craftsmen, and run with that. That'd be interesting. But we're probably going to get comedic dwarven Scottish stereotypes.
Don't know about comedic, but we certainly, if Peter Mullen is during the third, we're definitely getting Scottish, and we're getting a very particular type of Scottish. Anyone who knows his voice, yeah.
But
And wait, if I may say something really quick, I don't have that big of an issue with him being Scottish, but with him being permanently drunk, really just foolish. I do have a big issue with that. Like Dane or Dine, I know there's a big controversy over how to say that. He wasn't like the wisest dwarf in the books, but I mean he wasn't so bad. He was a lot better than any of the dwarves in the movies.
yeah, but going back to what Ken said around what's been confirmed and what it looks like Amazon are doing. Nikki, I'm not sure if you remember what Ken said, but like stuff like that, what Peter Jackson and John Howe said they want to keep in the same universe. Does that make you feel better? Does that make you feel more confident? Does that make you feel worse around it? Around the value of continuity?
To be honest, I'm not too worried either way. Like I said, the only thing that worries me is that they are getting because the trap here is that they get so caught up in trying not to be the same thing that they go to the other extreme. But I mean, I will not be upset either way as long as it's epic and done properly. As long as it's fantasy, and so they have to stick within the fantasy. It would be weird if they were steampunk. But apart from that, they have all the freedom in the world as far as I'm concerned with where they go and what they do with it. I just want to see what they actually do, because I love the original so much, and I also love the books, and I have in my head this picture of this magical world that's just beautiful, but also can be ugly and dark, and yeah. So for me, it's not a matter of I'm not concerned. It's just, yeah, I guess it would be nice to have the nods here and there, but either way, it's a matter of the acting and the follow through, like the stuff that they do, the script, the storylines. That's what interests me the most.
Talking about nods, would you like to see an Elijah Wood cameo?
Oh, thank you.
How I don't know how that would work.
Maybe he's
if I can answer on behalf of Nikki and maybe on the entire podcast, yes.
But then
well, it would be kind of would be fun to play Spot the Elijah Wood. You know how you play Spot Peter Jackson.
It's a $1 billion show playing Spot the Elijah Wood.
Yeah, Peter Jackson is like 5 different people in the Lord of the Rings. What is he, like a Rohirrim? He's a Nazgul. Well, not
Nazgul.
He is
not a Nazgul. Like he's one of the 9 Kings of Men pre-Nazgul. In like the
no. In Fellowship, he's a guy munching on a carrot and brie. I forget what he is in Two Towers. And in Return of the King, he was a pirate, and I think he only appears in the extended version. So,
Elijah Wood and Peter Jackson are 2 different people, unless I've missed the joke.
Yeah, but my point is, we don't even need to recognize him. He, of course, does not need to be a Hobbit. We're not going to see Hobbits. Well, we might, but I so hope we're not going to. And there's no good reason that we're going to. Some people, mostly the OneRing.net, does think that there will be, but I'm absolutely sure that.
Why are you trying to pick internet fights? Come on.
Yeah, that's getting cut.
Well, okay. First.
Okay, moving on.
We could get into that. We'll get into that later. But my point is, we don't need to know who he is. It can just be a little not a podcast, a little cameo just for fun. He can be a man in, I don't know, like the slums of Numenor, if such a place exists in Lord of the Rings on Prime, or just a little hunter. I don't know. He could be anything.
I mean, yeah, from an actor's point of view, sure. Why wouldn't he love to be a part of it? I mean, it is where he basically grew up. He was there when he was 18. He was there when he was 30, and
his 18th birthday.
It's part of his life, and it's a pretty big part of his career. But I mean, if he's just, why would they fly him across the world to New Zealand in the middle of a pandemic just to be in the background and not be seen? It
So
doesn't make sense.
his
Then he would
his
do it on his own expense.
Stephen, what's
his
his name?
cameo in The Hobbit cost $1 million, so
Yeah.
it's going to be pretty expensive for them to do that. But
Do you think Amazon?
I still think it's worth it. It's not my money.
First of all, the problem with those sort of cameos, unless it's a somewhat like Daniel Craig was apparently a stormtrooper in one of these recent Star Wars movies.
The Force Awakens, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm like, okay, cool with that. I didn't know about it at the time. Anyone could have been under that mask. It doesn't matter. And I learned about it after the time. I said, oh, that's cool. But if you're going to start injecting lore, cast from the previous movies into this, it better be so damn hidden that I would have no idea that they were there unless you told me. Because otherwise, it's just going to distract from the experience. I hate that kind of Easter eggs. I hate that kind of winking at the audience like that. It doesn't make the world feel more real. It just pulls me out of it and helps me remember, oh, this is just entertainment, and I don't want to do it. And how much
that sort of links into Tolkien's definition of secondary belief, and yeah, it sort of does bring you out.
Yeah. So nothing against those guys. They did great job in their movies, but I don't want to see them again in Middle Earth.
Or is that just because they're of the same cast, or would you have the same objection to any star cameo like Stephen Colbert or something?
I mean, once again, the whole thing is if they're recognizable, I don't want to see them because that's kind of how I feel with a lot of A-listers. I don't see Brad Pitt as whoever he's playing anymore. I just see Brad Pitt in an ancient Greek armor, or dressed up all cool and suave in the Ocean series, or insert movie here, because I mean he's now bigger than any role that he's playing. He's too big to disappear into the role. So yeah, for that reason, I don't. If they have cameos, I don't want them to be recognizable at all. It can be a cool Easter egg after the fact, to get rewatchability for him. Elijah Wood or Viggo Mortensen could say, "Oh yeah, I was in the show. I was in episode 3. See if you can find me." That sort of thing. I mean, that'd actually be kind of a fun marketing thing for Amazon to actually do, should they go down the cameo route. But if they make it obvious, no, it will just irritate me.
I think American kick with a football, whatever it's called, is absolutely trash and a useless sport. That's what I think personally.
You mean soccer?
Hey, there's an opinion.
No.
What do you know? You have opinions.
Yeah, and then I think the one where yours called football, but you're just picking up and kicking, and you're just picking up and running with the ball. So I don't really get how that works, but still.
Yeah.
Well, we Americanized soccer. That's really what happened, I think. So
Improved it, really.
Improved it. That's what I was about to say. We just made it a little bit better.
I'm looking at, I watch.
You're just bitter because we dumped your tea.
I watch these soccer matches, and I'm thinking, wait a second, why are these athletes, and you can't see me using air quotations right now, just look, they're all dolled up, their hair is just perfectly coiffed, and I'm like, if you're supposedly going to play a sport, why do you look like you're about to, go out and go to the club? I mean, come on, don't be afraid to get sweaty and messy, and stop falling over when someone breathes on you. I mean, flopping just does no credit to anyone.
I think my time to respond to the underlying endurance of having to play football is much more than say American kickball, or maybe basketball.
I mean, whoop-de-doo, you jog for 90 minutes. I mean, you don't even jog. I mean, half the time you're just standing there watching the ball.
If I see you run a 90-minute football match, and then we can see, yeah?
Okay, how about this? Let me say something really quick. It's about football. The New England Patriots are horrible. They deflate balls and they cheat. So, Fellowship, you get that. Penguin, you get that too. Hopefully none of us like them. And Tom Brady is also a cheater. So, okay, we can. That's our common ground. We can all unite against the New England
Yeah.
Patriots.
And then also
As I said before we started recording, I just race cars. I don't know what kind of sports you're talking about, except that you Americans have some habit of racing in circles, but that's another point.
Hey, it's
World
yeah.
Championship in turning right.
Okay, no. To go fast and turn left. It's who's the best at going fast and turning left. I mean, come on.
Is that Formula
Yeah,
One?
we just launched a new podcast. Welcome to the Council of
Well,
Sport.
but let's step aside. But it's interesting. I mean, I think Formula One is a very interesting sport. I'm not a big into NASCAR or Formula One, but it's just interesting the traditions that birth both of those sports. Like Formula One evolved from the early car races of the very wealthy and the aristocrats, just driving around as fast as they could, whereas the NASCAR comes from a tradition of like lower class people taking their common car that they have, souping it up as much as possible, and then racing each other. Just very different racing traditions that have evolved from very different roots. So anyway, it's.
And if I may clarify something I said a while ago, probably like 5 or 10 minutes ago in the podcast, at least 5 or 10 minutes ago, by politics, I mean that very, very, very loosely. Any modern ideologies, especially in America, because that's if any politics are going to be pushed into the show, it's probably going to be American politics. But yeah, again, I mean that very, very loosely, and it looks like we just lost Penguin.
But I think by losing Penguin, that's a good time to wrap up because it's becoming the Council of Sports podcast. But that's about it. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. First of all, I forgot to thank my lovely host. Thank you to Chen as usual.
No problem. It's fun.
Truly is. Thank you to talking to you.
Thank you for having me on again.
No problem. And thank you to Nikki as always.
No worries. It's been fun. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a real while, but we'll be back. But yeah,
For sure.
no matter what,
We'll be back to talk about how bad the New England Patriots are, and how Tom Brady shouldn't be allowed to play.
And American football is a sport. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe. Until the next video, my friends. Goodbye.